Hey Brian, Kevin Ward here. Okay, two issues in your question that I understood. One is a decision maker wasn't there, and two is an influencer who is not a decision maker was there. So the first one I'm going to do with what was actually your second question. I'm going to deal with it first because it's simpler. What do you do when there's a no-show decision maker and you're not told about it in advance? You've got the 10 hottest objection handler that talks about how to do the decision maker no-show when they don't show up and you knew about it up front. But what do you do when it's at the end of the listing presentation and then they tell you, well, I got to talk to so and so. Oh, so here's how you do it real simply. Oh, I apologize. I was under the impression that you were the only decision maker because when we spoke day before yesterday on the phone, I'd asked you if there were any other decision makers, and if I recall correctly, you had indicated that it was just you. So I did not realize that there was somebody else that needed to be here. So what do we need to do next? Or and basically what I'm doing is I'm letting them know that they told me they were the only decision maker. I'm letting them know that I know they lied to me, but I'm not doing it in an adversarial or confrontational way. In a confrontational way. I'm just letting them know I know, so that in the future they're not going to BS me again. So that's the simple way you deal with that. Now, when you got this other issue of the advisor, the influencer, and they're an influencer, and they're very important. Now, the place where you typically run into these is when you're working with first-time home buyers, and there's a parent or some expert that they know that they want to bring along to either look at houses, or once they've got the house in escrow, now they've got a parent that wants to show up, or an uncle who's a home inspector, and he's going to show up, and or maybe he used to be a contractor, or he's a plumber, and so now he's got to come in, and he's the expert, and it's his job to find something you missed. His job is to protect his niece and niece and her husband, because they're first-time home buyers. They're innocent. They're ignorant. They don't know. So you're in a situation where in a listing presentation, you've got an expert, a former flunky agent that couldn't make it in real estate, who's now their expert, who's there to protect them from making a bad decision. All right, so what do you do with it? Well, one, you embrace them, which means you got to be excited that they're there, because from your seller's perspective, it's a totally logical thing to have someone they trust there who has more knowledge about real estate than they do. So they have them there as an advisor to protect them from making a bad decision, to protect them from a bad agent, whatever it is. And so you've got to appreciate that and say, oh, it's awesome. Well, I am so glad you're here, and it's a pleasure to meet you. And so also, you got a background in real estate. That's awesome. So this is gonna be right down your alley. I mean, everything we're gonna talk about, you're gonna already know what's going on. That's pretty cool. So you really start out, one, by embracing them, by being excited that the advisor is here, and then two is you're going to really edify them. You're going to give them credibility. You're going to say, oh, that's awesome. So because you already know all this stuff, you just make them the expert, acknowledge them the expert. And what that does is now they have to trust you because you already are so smart that you knew they're great. And when you do that, now it makes it very difficult for them to discredit you because you've already edified them. And if they discredit you, then they're discrediting the one that builds them up. And I promise you, there's not many people that will edify them as a real estate expert the way you just did. And if you do that, whenever you're dealing with a third party, I call it a third wheel, the third wheel influencer, if you make them feel like an expert, you compliment them, you acknowledge them, you give them the credibility, then they can't discredit you because you're so smart. And you're the first person that's recognized their expertise as a real estate agent. So they got to like you. Then, as you're going through the presentation, and again, this typically is with buyers, is whenever you're going to make a point that's really, the seller needs to get this, then you would just look to Mr. Advisor and say, Mr. Advisor, obviously this is something that you already know. Boom. That if we price it too high, it's going to just sit on the market. You and Mr. Smarty Pants Advisor, I know you've seen agents do that, right? And how can they say no? Because when you know that you know, they can't disagree with you, and you've already given them the credibility of now. When you say, and as I'm sure you're already aware of this, that if you overprice it, he's not going to say, because it puts him in a very risky position to say, oh, well, that's not necessarily true. Because now he's going to just show that he's an idiot about real estate. So he's going to agree with you. So the way you do that is you, number one, embrace them. Number two, edify them. And then number three, tie them in. You give the assumption that you already, I'm sure you're already aware of this. So I know you've already seen this happen a lot of times. Oh, and I know you get this already. I know you already done this and so forth. And then when you do that, they just come along with you, and you make them a part of the energy toward hiring you. And then you can literally do it as you go through the presentation. And here's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do before we put your home in the market is we're going to do our pre-marketing. And here's what we're going to do. And I'm sure, Mr. Advisor, you can understand how important that is, right? And so forth. So the other thing is, if they do become antagonistic or they keep throwing you off by throwing out stupid objections or stupid questions, say, you know what, that's a great question. I appreciate you asking. So here's what I want you to. Here's what I would like to do is. Most of the questions you're asking are going to be covered in my presentation. So let me go ahead and let's talk about the things we need to talk about. Let's talk about the pricing. Let's talk about the market analysis and kind of the plan. And then at the end, if there's anything I've missed, Mr. Seller and Mr. Expert, then at the end we'll cover all of those questions. Because I want to hold that question. Because like if they throw up, well, what about your commission? You know what? That's a great question, and we're going to cover that in a minute. But we're not to the numbers yet. Right now we're still talking about the move itself and what's going to happen. What we need to price the property at. We'll get to the costs and the closing costs and all that in a moment. And then you just maintain control by not getting into because literally you may have. And it's very easy to get sucked into, now you're off the script and they're controlling the conversation. So hope that helps. Let me know. Talk soon. Way to go, bro.